Hi, my name's Sarah Southey, and I'm a social worker. And today I am joined by a few colleagues, and we are talking about teaching and upkeep for adolescent online safety. So today with me, I have Nicole, who is currently a master's student in social work, alongside Katie, who is a self-advocate and has some really insightful, wonderful wisdom to share about her online experiences and what works and what doesn't work for her. So we look forward to talking to you for the next 20 or so minutes and then taking some questions at the end.
So in terms of the content for today's presentation, first we're going to look at setting the stage for a conversation. So that includes setting up a time to talk, agreeing upon a plan, and also just generally what safe spaces may look like. Then we'll move on to open and clear communication. We have a few tips for you for that. And then questions to consider, and we'll end with an online safety contract.
Setting the stage. This is really important, and this is probably coming from my social work background and the work that I do with teens and families. But it's really, really important to make sure that you're setting up a time to talk about online safety, not just reactively, but doing it proactively. So you're setting up a time where you can talk about what's important to you around online safety. And that's what's important to your team and what's important to you as well as a caregiver of someone on the spectrum. So making sure that it's a time where you're both going to be engaged and feeling safe, having some material ready that you might want to share. So if you're thinking about using a safety contract, having those documents printed, which they are certainly available, or even having them just up on a screen online works too. But there are a couple of handouts that go along with the presentation slides. And certainly I'd encourage you to look at those, and we're going to talk about them in more detail later on. But having something like that open. Also having access to like what the apps might be. If you are going to be using some kind of track monitoring software, then what you'd want to do is make sure that you can walk through that with your teen as well. And you also want to make sure that your teen is ready for that conversation and prime them, right? So when we're talking about something kind of stressful like online safety, many teens take their time online quite seriously, right, Katie? You really enjoy being able to be online?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's a big part of your day. It's very meaningful. So knowing that you're going to be talking about something important, you want to be able to be thinking about in advance what you're looking for from that conversation, what your goals are, what you hope to get out of, what platforms you want to use, those sorts of things. And it's also important for everybody to be thinking about, questions like how late can they have access to online platforms and those sorts of things as well. So just thinking about it in advance. Thinking about what boundaries are there, what are do's and don'ts, what you're comfortable with. And then also it's really important that this conversation remain fluid. So bumps come up and down on the road. So Katie, for example, you've had some time before where you've had access to certain websites, and then you've had time where you haven't. And then you've built back some trust, and then you've had more access again, right? But it changes and evolves, right?
Yeah, so my Wi-Fi is usually on until like 9. Like it goes until like 9 at night. Then it turns on in the morning. So
that's a great example, and we'll get to some more of that in more detail later on in the conversation as well, when Katie and Nicole talk about the safety contracts, but just some things to kind of start to think about how to set the stage, how to prepare for those conversations.
Okay, so in terms of open and clear communication, this is crucial when wanting to communicate with your adolescent in any situation. I think the most important thing to remember is to have a conversation. Don't just provide your adolescent with a bunch of information and rules. Really discuss the topic and make sure you are listening to them just as much as they may be listening to you, and also asking them if they have any concerns as well. In terms of tips for helping to create that open and clear communication, the first thing is in relation to getting and keeping their attention. So you can do this by using their name at the beginning of a sentence, making sure they're paying attention before you ask a question or give instruction, and then also using their interests or current activity to engage them. Another tip surrounding processing information. So this means don't include too much irrelevant information, as this can lead to kind of like an information overload. Say less and speak slowly while using specific keywords that you can repeat and emphasize. Also pausing between words and phrases to give your adolescent time to process what you've said, and also time to think of a response. Making sure they're able to fully process information can also include not asking too many questions, using less nonverbal communication, using visual supports if you can, and just being aware of the environment you're in, because sensory differences may affect information processing. Avoiding open-ended questions is another tip to keep in mind. Try to keep questions short, only ask what's necessary, also be specific in what you're asking. And then lastly, just remembering to be very clear in what you're saying, avoiding sarcasm, irony, figurative language, rhetorical questions, and exaggeration. Or if you do use one of these, just making sure you fully explain what you've said and clarify the meaning.
Thanks, Nicole. So those are good best practice for communicating with your teen on a number of issues, but particularly, like we mentioned before, online is crucial for teens. That's where they spend so much of their time, and that's where they're connecting with their peers, especially in the last 12 months more than ever. And that's where they're making friends who may not be in real life friends, but people they've met online that they're really connecting to. We know that there's not a lot of opportunity to meet with people face to face and engage the way that we used to pre-pandemic. So more than ever, your teens are going to be super invested in their online activities, and we need to make sure that we are having those conversations in a meaningful way so that everybody is on the same page. So to further that, getting into some specific questions that can be asked, something that you really want to brush up on and explore with your adolescent is, what are some examples of information that's okay to give out online, and what are some examples of information that's not okay to give out online? We will be touching upon this question probably in all 4 of the sessions that we do, because this is where we see a lot of problems with people running into issues with being harassed or possibly sharing information that is leaving them feeling vulnerable at a later point in time. So it's one of the biggest issues. So we're going to be reinforcing that one again and again. Another amazing question is, who are 2 adults who you can trust online, who you can trust to talk to about some of the things that you're doing online? So should there be a situation where it may not make sense to tell mom or dad, or the caregiver who's responsible for the individual, sometimes it might be really helpful for that person to have someone else. So I know someone I'm currently working with, she's not that close with her mom these days, but one of her mom's friends actually has turned out to be like quite a safe person for her to share with. So she shares a lot of information with that person. And then her mom feels relief in knowing that, okay, she's not talking to me, but she is talking to somebody else. And her mom is quite worried right now because she is making a lot of new friends online, and the mom doesn't know these friends anymore. And that's a reality right now for many of us, because we're not able to meet our kids' friends. If our kids have friends, we're not able to meet them in person right now the way that we may have a year ago or so, when gatherings at people's homes were much more the norm. So really important to be identifying safe adults, because we can't vet our kids' friends the ways that we may have in past times. Okay, so then another great question, and this goes back to impulse control. We talked a lot about impulse control in our last session. If something makes you sad, scared, upset, angry, any emotion that is a big emotion, what should you do? So walking through a plan is super important, breaking down those steps, and possibly even having like a Post-it note or a visual somewhere of different things that that person can do. That's really helpful, because those are the moments where we often find the most impulsive behaviors that are the least constructive and least helpful for the person who is trying to engage on safe online behavior. So making sure that we have plans and we have discussion in advance proactively about, what do you do if you're upset? What do you do if someone makes you feel uncomfortable? And making sure that that information is readily available, because we know as stress increases, our ability to problem solve and react the way that we would usually do when we're not stressed is not there. It's escalated, and we're oftentimes quite impulsive and may end up saying or doing things that we wish that we didn't. And then another question, there's many questions, but if you could only ask a handful of them, this would be the other really important one to ask. And that question is, are there types of contents or sites that are inappropriate, and why? And so we know that autistic individuals may struggle a little bit more with understanding things that are appropriate and inappropriate at times, and following some social norms. So for example, it might be very inappropriate to be watching pornography in a shared space, for example. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's not an okay thing to do. It just means that it's probably more of a private thing to do. And for some families, and depending on the individual's age and appropriateness, it may not be an appropriate thing to do. It just really depends on your family situation. But walking through what's appropriate and inappropriate for your household and your team together is really important to do. Setting out those boundaries is a good practice.
So now we are going to look at an online safety contract. So this was adapted from the Family Online Safety Institute. It's a great way of laying out clear and concise rules and expectations for internet usage and just how to remain safe while using the internet. And I believe this is available as a handout that you can either print or download. So it's important for both kids and adults to agree on how personal devices and technology should be used. The main agreements for the contract are to be honest and share with caregivers what the adolescent is doing online, always be kind and polite to others online, think before posting a comment, photo, or video, go online at agreed times and respect limits, don't access inappropriate content or apps, don't share any personal information, make use of security settings, tell caregivers if bad or disturbing content is seen and report it online, and lastly, have fun, be creative, and explore the internet safely. There's also an additional section below that where you can write out additional rules that are best for your family. If there are any unique concerns or rules, this is where they would be listed. It then says at the bottom, I agree to these rules. There's a spot for the adolescent signature, the caregiver signature, and then there's also just a little acknowledgement that if the rules are broken, there will be consequences. So I will now turn this over to Katie to talk about what she likes and doesn't like about her own safety contract that is shown on the right side of the screen.
Okay, so what I like about this is that I get to have sleep when my Wi-Fi goes off. That's a big part for me. Another part of it is, like, I respect my mom's boundaries and stuff like that, like where she puts it in a line and stuff, like locking my phone, like when it needs to be locked and stuff like that. That's all through using the screen time app.
Are there any parts that you don't enjoy?
Yes, when my mom locks it, but it is what it is.
My thoughts around the safety contract are that sometimes safety contracts can be really helpful. Similar to kind of what you were saying, Katie, is like you respect the boundaries of it. Sometimes it's very helpful to have that information in writing. Particularly individuals with autism are sometimes really not necessarily always processing things in one specific way. So sometimes people may be auditory processors. Other times individuals really like seeing intangible written instructions, breaking down exactly what the rules are. I know many people I work with are very big on following rules, right? And very big on fairness. So having all that information clearly articulated and in writing is a really nice way for many people to adapt. And so, Katie, what happens if the rules get broken on a safety contract?
So what happens if that gets broken is my mom locks my phone.
I'm sure that's disappointing and frustrating and hard. Yeah, is that right?
It is. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Within that, though, does it give you some time to kind of recharge? Positives within that?
Yes. Like thinking about what I did instead of just going right back on.
Right. Yeah, so it gives you that reflection time, right? That cool down time, which is so hard to do. Not to put you on the spot, Katie, but one more question. You know, we were talking earlier about like having to deal with the impulse, right? We were talking about questions to ask yourself, what to do if you're mad or upset or that sort of thing. What do you do if you're mad or upset when you're online?
Well, when I'm mad or upset, this is a good thing to have if your parents will agree to it, to get some fidget toys.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Thank you for sharing. Fidget toys are great. I have a pencil that I'm fidgeting with right now, actually. Around safety contracts, they're both available. The example, we included the template of Katie's just so that people have a little bit of a launching point to kind of add stuff from their own. And Nicole also referenced where we found this template, and it's going to be it's going to be listed in additional resources as well there. So there'll be lots of opportunities to understand how to work through this. Some adolescents may be reluctant to something like this at first, right? Like the idea of a contract, it sounds so formal. It sounds kind of intense, and probably your adolescent just wants to spend that time online and not be in a position where they have to do something like this. But what I would say is it is really effective at making sure that everybody ends up having more time online safely, as opposed to ending up in a situation where if you're not having these conversations in advance, then like I've seen families where their teens are like not allowed online for like months on end. And like, that's also not a very realistic reality. As I've mentioned before, it's kind of difficult because everybody's online. So how do you remove someone from that for extended periods of time? It's not really a very realistic strategy. So having something like this might help people get on the same page, slow down, and think about what the best ways to handle difficult situations might be.
It's also not easy for the individual to get off of the internet because like what they're doing might be like important to them, but not important to the mom or dad.
Exactly. And that's actually a point that we brought up in the last slide too. And understanding autism, we know that there's a lot of like hyper focus, right? So it might be super, super, super important to that person, but other family members may not see that importance. So in those situations, it's important that the teen advocates for what they're using online and why that's really important to them. And hopefully their parents will have open and listening ears about that. So if people have questions, now is a good time to start typing your questions into the chat. And then certainly at the end of the presentation, we will be able to address those.
So all of these are some really great resources for you to use to learn a little bit more, gather some more material if you are going to be having that conversation with your adolescent. But specifically, and I mentioned this in the first session as well, the Internet Safety for Teens with ASD, that's a great presentation and has a lot of great illustrations in that as well for risks, tips to discuss this topic, and additional resources as well. And then the Internet Safety Planning and Prevention for Adolescents with ASD is also a great one.
So we have the future sessions listed here. So the sessions 3 and 4 are actually geared at the adolescent themselves. Both Nicole and Katie will be back giving some great tips, do's and don'ts, and also just ensuring safety. We're going to go through an online game in the final session together. And then the first session was a good one to kind of warm up to some of the topics we dug more into today. This is our last session with parents and caregivers right now. So I just want to flip it to my speaking partners here. Does anybody have anything else that they want to share with parents or caregivers? Because we know that the next couple times we're going to be talking more to teens themselves.
Yes, so I would like to tell parents that don't let their child be like in that state of inappropriate mind, or let them like try and like suffer with that stuff. Like, you know, like you have to like kind of like agree to what they're saying. You have to help them out with that.
So are you saying like if a teen comes to you about their experiences online, you want to listen and like help them out regardless?
Yeah, regardless. Good. You have to help them out.
It's a very good point. And then there's different ways to help people too. So if you go back to the first session, for anybody who didn't tune into it, we do list a bunch of resources there just around like how to report unsafe things and how to ensure safety. But I really appreciate what you're saying there, Katie. Listening to the good stuff and the hard stuff is really, really important.
Well, I can give you an example really quickly of what like to do if someone or group chat or something inappropriate pops up, anything like that, what you do is you block, report, and don't chat with that person again.
Right. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, those are just very simple, very easy instructions, but really hard to remember in the moment when you're sometimes online and you can get caught up, right? So it's block, report,
and don't talk to them again.
And in sessions 3 and 4, we're going to go through like some of those things that you would want to be blocking or reporting, right? Because there's some really not so good behavior online from a lot of people. So we will dig in more to that next time. So in the future sessions, we're going to be actually teaching teens how to like look out for scams, how to look out for like, what are the red flags? We're going to try to figure those things out. And Katie's going to be back and she's a wealth of information. So we look forward to that. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions, my contact info is here. Otherwise, we thank Autism Ontario for having us, and I'd like to thank my co-presenters for sharing today. Thanks so much, guys. Hello. So we are back live. Nicole and I are here.
Hello.
the previous part was pre-recorded. Now we're here live for any questions. And we've got a few questions coming in, and also just a few extra topics that I wanted to kind of bring up that related to some of the pieces discussed. If I can start with that maybe. One is, so this is slightly outside of the scope of online safety, but very much related to adolescents being online. And what I've observed in my clinical practice a little bit that I wanted to put out to the audience today as something to think about when they're creating safety contracts is thinking about safety contracts extending beyond just the social media platforms, but also possibly even into email communications. And the reason why I say that is because there's a lot of talk recently about digital citizenship, particularly with the school boards locally and provincially. There's been a lot of opportunities for webinars for parents and students around digital citizenship. And I think that's coming up a lot, particularly in my clinical practice. What I've noticed is in terms of email communication, with students being online for the better part of the year, with high school students particularly being online most of the week, whether or not we're in lockdown sort of stages, I'm seeing a lot of my neurodiverse adolescents being quite reactive quite quickly to miscommunications with their teaching teams, or frustration with maybe not having things go the way they would hope they would go in terms of an assignment or that sort of thing. So one other piece that I would suggest being a part of the dialogue, possibly even worked into the safety contract, would be how do you communicate not just on social media platforms, but how also do you communicate with people online in terms of emails, because we know that that's a major source of communication for people right now. And adolescents are very well versed in many ways, very fluent in most social media platforms, but in terms of email etiquette, they may be less versed. And so some of those language pieces, some of the frustrations, that's all kind of written down now all of a sudden. There's an electronic copy that follows that person. So I'm observing more than once, a handful of times, some of my clients, my adolescent clients, kind of running into some difficult situations where they're getting in trouble from teachers or from principals even, and they're experiencing disciplinary action because they've responded impulsively to some information that they weren't very pleased with. And so just slowing things down, I think in general, just some body awareness, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more with in future sessions for sure, but just like making sure that before someone is communicating with their friends online or even professionals in their team at school, that they're just doing a check-in on how am I feeling right now? Am I prepared to be having this communication right now? Is it better to wait if I'm angry or frustrated and talk about this later? Is even electronic communication the best form for what I'm thinking about or what's bothering me right now? So that's just an extra piece I wanted to really make sure to add to our discussion today, because it's come up a fair bit recently, I've noticed. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a great piece to add. And you know what? I think that is a part of online safety, because thinking about those emotion regulation pieces, if a student is frustrated and they want to respond in a certain way to another student or teacher, whether it's over like the Zoom chat or through email, I think, and we do talk about this in the future sessions for adolescents, like replying to a rude comment or something on social media. It takes in all those same pieces, right? That piece of needing to breathe, take a step away, and then really try and process those emotions and see how they can properly respond, especially professionally.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Nicole, you just highlighted another form of online communication, the Zoom chat, or if the school is using Google Classrooms, or if it's like a social online group outside of school. We're using all these different platforms right now. I know last summer when I was doing a employment group for teens through Autism Ontario, that we had to kind of like really set out the ground rules for expectations of the chat function during the group, because in one group there was like a lot of kind of side chats happening and they were quite distracting for other members. And knowing that I primarily work with neurodiverse individuals and that autistic youth generally do quite well with like very structured rule and very clear worded expectations, I was able to kind of quickly adapt that. But in other situations, it may not be as clearly articulated or spelled out. So another element that could even be added to the safety contract would just be asking questions about what the norms are in whatever chat, whether it's academic, social media, whatever the forum is. What are the expectations on how people communicate in this forum? It's a major self-advocacy piece that can be challenging. I know that it is quite hard to self-advocate as an adolescent, but it could really go a long way in ensuring safety and appropriate conduct and behavior online.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I think Nicole, you had another question or two, right?
Yes, one of them was, what are some of the materials I should have prepared when having the conversation about online safety? We did mention in the presentation, just having that online contract ready, having those rules to kind of go through, knowing what additional unique pieces that you may need to add in that additional section for your own expectations, your own experiences. Maybe even having also an app or two where you can review the security settings, as examples as you're talking about those types of things, or having privacy policies are kind of boring, but at least just showing that it is there and there is a whole long list of expectations within one specific platform, right? And actually we noted some great additional resources at the back end of that presentation that may provide a visual support. There's a couple of presentations specifically for online safety for teens with ASD, and maybe even just having that up while you're having that conversation. If they need something more visually engaging, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, right. It's talking about the safety contracts. It's a lot of information at one time. We know a lot of people that relate to autism are more visual than others. So having something visual is great. Also, we know that a lot of autistic individuals are good rule followers a lot of the time. So like seeing what the rules are, seeing what the regulations are in terms of some of these privacy policies could be very helpful. It's a lot of information about things that they may not necessarily be thinking of, right? There may be more just like thinking about using the platforms, not necessarily the outcomes of where their information is stored or how long it's stored for, or what kind of record that creates, or reputation, or how my communication impacts others online. They're just kind of really looking to get that rush from engaging with peers, people that they may know in person, or maybe they don't know in person, but looking to connect, right? I've talked a little bit about this before in some of the other webinars, and Nicole does some work with the Kids Help Phone. We know that those calls are coming in more frequently than ever, and people are more isolated, lonely, and struggling with mental health in the adolescent age group than ever before. So this online piece is so very important, but we want to do it as safely as possible.
Absolutely.
What else? Oh, the only thing I want to say, so this isn't what else should I add to the safety contract, but it could kind of work in there. What I would say is what you could add in to make sure that you're reviewing it regularly is just like a stipulation, something along the lines of, we will review the safety contract every 6 weeks, or whatever time period makes sense. And the reason why I would also add that into the safety contract is just to create that expectation that this is fluid and this is ever changing. And we're going to keep checking back in and figure out, hey, how is this working for you now? What more support could you use? What platform might be better for you at this point in time as you continue to evolve and grow, and so do your friends, those sorts of things, right? There's always new features and changing, and lots of rapid growth in tech. And so we want to make sure that we are allowing opportunities for ongoing conversations to revisit. So I would also put that in the safety contract too.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome piece to add, especially as your teen starts to learn more about online safety. Maybe you can not loosen up those boundaries, but really just expand what's available to use for them. Or maybe limiting it if there's been a negative experience. It is ever changing. I think that's a really great point.
Okay, and then one other question we had come in, and this is probably the last one because we're just about at a time here. So we have, would you include boundaries for your children's reactions online? When they have difficulty with self-regulation? So I think that many people that I work with really struggle with self-regulation, and online can be very triggering right? And it can bring a number of emotions. So earlier I was mentioning something about like doing a bit of a body scan, checking in before you get online that you're in a calm and relaxed place and it is a good time to get online. That could absolutely be part of a safety contract. Something like taking a minute of like a mindfulness kind of scan every 20 minutes or so you're online, setting the timer, taking a minute away from the screen, doing like a little walk around, grabbing a stress ball, whatever. All those kinds of things, you know your adolescent best and what strategies work. But I would absolutely book in I would put into the safety contract regular intervals to check on how they are coping in that moment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like, what do they currently do to manage? And then if it gets to a certain point, and you're noticing that they're not able to self-regulate at all, then that's a cue that we're going to turn off the internet at that time type of thing. We're going to take a break from that particular app or that sort of thing for that day or for at least an hour or something like that. Mm-hmm. I would absolutely integrate. Yeah, so we hope that you bring some of your teens to the future sessions. So we've got 2 more coming up, and we look really forward to hopefully connecting more directly with your teens in those sessions. And I think they'll be really engaging and really interactive. Katie will be back with us, and we just want to thank Autism Ontario again for having us, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.